Nicola. It's nice having this talk with you finally in Japan. Today, I would like to address a certain number of issues, some pertaining to what you have done and what's already famous in Japan, and some relating to more recent issues, especially your recent and current work. This year saw finally the publication in Japanese of one of your major writings, namely the Japanese translation of Radicant. And maybe we can start by evoking this important publication. As far as I can guess, the Japanese public mainly knows you through the concept of relational aesthetics, and it has been translated and adapted in various forms in Japan too. Some time has passed since this very important turning point in contemporary art, and some time has also passed since the publication of Radicant itself. So first, I would like to ask you how you came to elaborate this concept and the theory attached to Radicant, and then how you feel about it today to measure what was important then, and with 10 years or so that have passed since then, how you feel about this publication today.
Well, maybe rethinking about it, I would say that my three first books, which are Relational Aesthetics, Post-Production, and Radicant, were more or less talking about the same generation of artists and trying to see their work from different angles, I would say. Well, mainly my generation, first. After it changed, actually, because from the X form and my last book called Inclusions, I'm addressing completely different topics. But those three books actually are a kind of unity, I would say. And Radicant, I would say, is a book about identity, but not the way people would actually address it in a classical way. First, radicant is a word which is used in botanics, and which describes a vegetal, a plant, for example, which grows its roots while advancing, like ivy, for example, or strawberries. So there's no original root. If you just take the original root out, it still grows, which makes it the opposite of radical in English. Because radical means something that belongs to one root. And of course, if you just take it out, the organism dies. So the main idea about Radicant is very simple. Its identity is not behind you. It's in front of you. My identity is still something to come. It's not a fixed, still thing. It's mobile. It's moving, And I don't know who I am really. I will know maybe when I'm dead. Before it's problematic, and it's not something obvious. So we have to do with what we have, which is our social context, the country where we are born, our history. Of course, we have to deal with that. But it's not the end of your identity. It's the beginning of it. And that's from this very general idea that I tried to build this theory, trying to understand also what's the way artists are addressing those topics today, and the way they build dynamic roots, in some ways in their work, addressing different types of cultures, sometimes cultures which are not their own culture, but others, and that's really important. There's a kind of dialogue that can be built out of this. So yeah, I would say in a very simple way that Radicant is a book about identity. That's
this fair ACK is also a representative example of how open identities are a goal today in today's art. You mention identity as having various aspects, and if I understand well, it's not only about regional and cultural identities. Today, our artists are open to many outside fields, mainly history, science. We see many artists drawing upon scientific concepts, engineering concepts, robotic concepts. That's also a form of openness. And on the other hand, I think you were stressing the importance of mobility and the openness, obviously, to other cultures as a way to inform and to form that identity process. How do you feel about this openness to other fields, such as science or engineering, on the one hand? And how do you feel about this openness to mobility and the idea that travel is also a main component of an artist's work today, given the situation we've faced since the publication of your book?
Well, actually, it's the situation is full of paradoxical things. One paradox is, if I talk about identity as something which is not given by your context, by your original context, it may sound like a call for standardization in a way. But my enemy is standardization. Uniformity is the most horrible thing we can think about. And what I try to defend in this book, Radicant, is also the idea that differences are absolutely crucial. It's a matter of physics, actually. Energy comes from differences, always, like in thermodynamics or a motor, the motor of a car. If there are no differences, there's no energy. So differences are the things we have. Cultural differences, for example, are important to be defended, not as something which would be us, that would define us, but something that we live within a context, and that's really important to fight against uniformity. There was a French writer at the very beginning of 20th century, Victor Segalen, who wrote a very incredible essay about exoticism. It was in 1918, if I remember well. And he said exoticism is not a matter of folklore, of cliché. It's a matter of understanding differences and supporting differences wherever they are, actually. Singularities are the motor of culture. But singularities are not only national, they are also individual, which is really important to understand. We are all different, not only because I'm French and you're Japanese, for example, but because we as human beings are all different. And art is the land of singularities, where singularities can be expanded to the extreme limits of what can be done. And that's why it's fascinating also.
In your book, you mention, while analyzing Segalen's writings, you also mention the notion of Creole, and I tend to understand what you've just said in relationship with the concept of creolization, the one that was elaborated later on by Édouard Glissant and all those great writers and philosophers. If we relate what you say to the concept of Creole and creolization, in the end, again and again, it's a dialogue we have with Western concept of modernity and how we still have to face it and digest it today. The notion of creolization may not be that well known in Japan, but obviously, as any region of the world, it has gone through several processes of creolization. And maybe contemporary art in Japan today is more sensitive to that aspect. And on the other hand, for example, the great Bruno Latour has come a few times in Japan. He's stated that museums and art in Japan were different because they had not gone through the Western process of modernity, which can be disputable. How did you consider the notions of modernity, of creolization, as a background to the theory you developed in Radicant?
Creolization is historically linked to colonization first, because it was a displacement of populations, and people were obliged in a way to deal not only with the place they were, moved to, but within each other to recreate a possible culture. And creolization means that every one of us is an original mix in some ways.
Yes, wow. I'm sorry, I should have defined it first, but put it simply, it's a cultural blending born from historical, often violent circumstances, and mainly colonization.
But not only violent. I could name another example of creolization, which is maybe not the one that people talk about generally, but for example, the influence of ukiyo-e and okusai on Impressionism, for example, it's another kind of from Japan to Europe creolization. There was this big exhibition in 1894, I think, at the Beaux-Arts de Paris, of Japanese etchings, which was seen by all the artists at the time, and which create direct effects on the way, especially the French Impressionists, were seeing space, or Van Gogh, for example. It's not only one way, and that's a very, fortunately, there are many examples of that, and there's no culture without appropriation. But appropriation is not the right term, because it would mean that someone or some collectivity would own something. And I think culture is never about owning something. It's about, making something circulate, and then whoever wants it can just use it. I see culture and art especially as the world of use, not of owning. Signs are not the property of anyone. And that's how the history of art is made of those, circulations of signs. We could actually rewrite an history of art only talking about this person borrowing this from his or her neighbor, etc., etc.
And could you tell us how, from this theory, you came to elaborate X-form and inclusions, which we can see as a form of somewhat of a turning point in comparison with the three other writings you mentioned?
Well, the two last books, X-form and inclusions, are X-form difficult to translate because it doesn't really exist as a word, actually, but are belonging to a cycle which is based on the consciousness of climate change and how climate change and the Anthropocene modifies our perception of space and time. That was my preoccupation for the last 10 years, actually. And it actually started in Taipei in 2014 with the exhibition The Great Acceleration, subtitled Art in the Anthropocene, which was the first biennial to address climate change in a direct way, actually. At the time, I had to explain what the word Anthropocene meant. which is now less mandatory. So I'm just going to define very briefly those two books. An X form is the name I give to those objects, not necessarily material objects, which are taken in a movement of exclusion and inclusion of in any society, actually. I can just give a very simple image of it. It's my friend Liam Gillick was talking about dogs, artists like a dog actually trying to get into the garbage and look for things that nobody wants to see. But like a dog, the artist brings it back in the carpet, actually, and is very proud of it. And nobody wants to see that. Oh, please, no, don't, don't show this. No, it's not possible. That's the X form. In and out. We don't want to see that. We artists want to show that. That's a process which exists in any culture, actually. One society doesn't want to include this or that element in its functionment, and the role of the artist is to show what people don't want to see, in a way. And why don't they want to see it? Because it's annoying, it's problematic, it's not consensual, it's a problem. So that's this movement, this double movement, centripede and centrifuge, centrifugal, which creates what I call the X form. And so it's about, in a way, garbage. It's about recycling. It's about using things that our societies put aside, then in a metaphorical way, of course. It's a process which happens in any culture, and what a society doesn't want to see is not the same in Japan, in France, in South Africa, wherever. Every society has its very specific no-go zones, in a way. So that's for the X form. I say it's linked to the idea of the Anthropocene because it's about recycling. It's about what is a waste, what is a garbage, and what is not. And every society has to decide actually what is garbage and what is useful, what is good. And that the answers are never obvious, never. That's a start, actually, to think about the Anthropocene, because the very specific position of an artwork in any society is that it's exactly in between waste and luxury. It
can go very fast from one status to the other.
Exactly. It's, I think, the most striking thing. The position, the metaphorical position of the artwork in our societies is exactly this, exactly in the middle of these two extremes, I would say.
The great poet Michel Deguy once said that, he was very critical of many contemporary art productions, and he once said that the problem of contemporary art will soon be a matter of solving a garbage problem, meaning that there will be so much large-scale productions which will go eventually to the trash bin because of this decline in its value, its market value, and its social value. And how do you analyze this oscillation? This obviously it has become extremely fast and extremely unstable recently.
No, the problem is that who provides the value we give to things, actually? Is the market value the only value? And that's a real question. In history, this passage from luxury to waste can be absolutely fast. if you go back to Rome in the 9th century BCE, people were just destroying all the statues to make a shulk out of it, destroying whatever was in metal, to use it again, actually, and there was absolutely no respect for the antiquity art that was still in the streets of Rome. It was a monumental, destruction at this time. And then you can say that, of course, garbage, artwork is saved from go back to garbage because of its market value, but I'm not sure that's the main value today. I don't think the criterion is only the price. That's what I mean. For me, it's completely, not connected in a way.
How about inclusions? What was your does this announce another trilogy, or what is your present mindset to give everyone an update on your recent theoretical work?
Maybe it's part of a trilogy, actually, because the DX form was the book about garbage and waste, and what's the position of waste, in today's societies. Inclusions is more, first, it's a book based on anthropology. I'm trying to explain why artists are today's anthropologists, in a way. And I talk a lot about anthropology and refer to both Claude Lévi-Strauss and Viveros de Castro, to name someone who's more contemporary, or Tim Ingold, anthropologists. Why? Because Tim Ingold was saying that anthropology is philosophy with people in. That's his definition of anthropology, and I think it's a very good one. Anthropology is philosophy with people in. Because anthropology doesn't have any knowledge. It doesn't start from any knowledge. It's a dialogue, actually. The ethnological approach is based on discussing with people and trying to analyze the way they live, right? So it's not, an anthropologist shouldn't actually have a preconceived knowledge of what he or she is going to find. It's a science which is born out of dialogues. And that's what fascinates me, actually. You see the link I can make with the relational aesthetics here, of course. But also, I think it's very important to have an anthropological approach of contemporary art. First, because today, when we know that the natural resources of the planet are, we are in excess from the 1st of July or something like that. After the 1st of July, we're just eating our capital in a way. So lots of people today would say, why are we still doing art? Don't you think it's superfluous that we should actually, become only militant, ecological militants and stop being artists and deal about art? And I disagree with that very deeply. When Winston Churchill in 1940 was said, but I'm sorry, Prime Minister, but you still are giving a lot of budget to culture. That's war. You should actually give more money to weapons and cut all the budget for culture. And he answered, but then what are we fighting for? And that's this idea that I want to defend. It's, I think, humanity might be defended, by the fact that it's producing artworks and thoughts and poetry and philosophy And if not, we're not any better than monkeys or or any other species, actually. So why would we fight to save the planet? Maybe we just all suicide ourselves collectively. It would be a good solution. So it is really important to. Art exists since prehistoric times. There was not one society that didn't have art, actually. Never. Never. No, strangely. So if it was so useless, why would we still working around those things, actually? I think it's much more useful than we think. I think it's much more important than we think. I think this has to be defended as much as ecology. It's important to be militant as a citizen for against climate change, but it's also important to go on into what we human beings are interesting for, also.
And I think we can qualify those artists' anthropological approach as a kind of a reflexive turn, in that obviously they, through their work, they reflect in a new way on the status of mankind, the issues which we are confronting, and also they are producing new forms and sometimes concepts which are clearly different from what we would do when writing books or texts. Do you think this is almost a necessity today for a young contemporary artist? This reflexive posture when creating artworks?
Well, I tend to think that there's never any necessity. You're not obliged to work on this or that. It's very important. I want to be surprised by art. If I already knew what it was, it would really bore me very easily. I don't know what art is, by the way. If I could have a good definition of it, I would be very happy. But it evolves all the time. Since the beginning of times, it has changed, 1,000 times, and this definition is impossible to find. What is art? Believe me, if I could get an answer, I would stop being interested immediately, I think, and that's why there's no necessity. But the only necessity is to be surprised by the singularity of a position, of a vision, of a human being. Today, art is about singularity. It can be a collective singularity sometimes. I will not say this in an individualistic approach, but it's always about singularity.
And how do you articulate that with militantism and also values and maybe moral, in that some artists, through their militant approach or through some of their works directly addressing critical contemporary issues, necessarily get a moralistic tone, or, to put it more frankly, politically correct.
Yeah.
I think there is a huge issue in contemporary art today concerning that. What is your position toward
when I do curate an exhibition like the last one I did, Planet B in Venice, it's really about the Anthropocene, it's about climate change, but it's not about, I'm not interested necessarily by artists who are just, trying to convince us of what we already agree with. It can be, contemporary art can be taken as a kind of closed space, and militantism, if there's nothing more than that, it's not enough for me, actually. What interests me are artists who acknowledge this situation and have a kind of consciousness of what's going on, and try to understand the world from this consciousness. It's the way they invent spaces in their work, or space-times, if you prefer, which acknowledge this situation. No. What does the climate change do to our understanding of the world, the way we see it, the way we understand it, the way we can represent it? And that was the idea with Planet B, which is an exhibition about using the very old notion of the sublime, for example. It's a very interesting notion today because it was actually defined in a very precise way by Edmund Burke in 1757 as a feeling of delight tainted with fear. No? The idea of danger and being overwhelmed by something. Well, that's exactly the way we all feel today with climate change. Danger is here. We are overwhelmed. We cannot anymore represent the world as something which is outside of us, which means that the very basis of the Western painting since the Renaissance is just gone. It was the idea of a figure and a background behind. Figure/background. This is impossible to think now. There's no background behind us. We're all part of what's going on. We're all part of climate change. We're all part of what's going this modification, the degrees of temperature which grow, the rise of waters, etc., etc. This is part of our very self, in a way. So we cannot consider ourselves, and the artists don't consider themselves anymore, like being able to represent the world as this kind of setting behind us, actually. The idea of the humankind mastering nature is just gone, you know. And this is where actually even the Shinto is interesting for this, for example. You know, it's a totally different way of approaching nature than the Western one. And that's why I don't believe in a kind of progressive history of art today. I think we have to include, and that's the title, inclusions, very different ways of seeing the world in order to being able to reinvent a culture and ways of representations, techniques and representational protocols which include climate change in a positive and let's say productive way, I would say.
I'm going to change the topic a bit. I think many people here are very much interested in how, alongside your theoretical work, how you have been curating exhibitions, of course, but also how you have created and transformed institutions. And of course, you've been through many famous institutions. Most people here, I think, know about your important work there, but I would like to address the more recent part of your work, and that is Montpellier Contemporain, or MoCo, which was formed in 2017, 18, if I remember well, in Montpellier, in southern France, and which brings together 3 sites, a school of art, one exhibition site called Panacée, dedicated to contemporary art, and another one called MoCo, which houses exhibitions. And it's very interesting in that it creates a new relationship with public and private collections also. So could you elaborate on the project behind MoCo?
Sure. As a general introduction, I would say that I can apply to myself the idea that only difference can be an energy, you know, because if I was only focused on writing books or only focused in curating exhibitions, I would not have this fuel, this energy that leads me to both, actually, in a way. I need, when I always say that when I have a research, I'm curating an exhibition. When I have some answers, when I start to understand what I tried to do in a way, and given the feedback of the artist through an exhibition, then I can write a book. And then the book, leads to the next exhibition. So it's hyper important for me to have a kind of, go and return between words and images, for example, between theory and art, and really the work of the artists, and also this institutional action that I had, in the last 20 years. For me, it's a whole thing. It's the way I could define myself in a way. It's like I'm always turning into that circle, which is a stretch circle, a book, then an exhibition, then it also feeds. I'm not. I went out of the institutional world last year, actually, but till now it was actually feeding completely my also my institutional work, and the idea. Every time when I'm asked to invent a place, like in Montpellier, as you said, is understand the context, the local context, but also understand the times. There's a vertical and a horizontal, parameters that you have to take into account, and then never repeat what's been already done. Every situation calls for a new invention, in a way. And what was needed at that time in Montpellier also was a kind of horizontal institution that would be a kind of motor for everything else in this city. So I connected the art school to the art center, and it was the motor that I used actually to go on. And it worked quite well, actually. All the artists exhibiting in the art center were intervening in the art school. All the students participated to the exhibitions. So there was a kind of circle of a kind of virtuous circle here, which was very productive. But the lessons I take from it is every place, every situation calls for a specific solution. It's useless and generally it doesn't work if you try to repeat something or take a model that's already existing, because it's not the way it works, unfortunately. And if you just repeat institutions which are already existing, if you just apply the same methods, the same ways of doing, the same contents, then it's doomed to fail. And there are many places that fail.
And how about the exhibitions and the collections at MoCo when you created the place, especially the collections?
Well, the whole idea of the institution, MoCo, was to, through the three different places, to recreate, in a way, the career of an artist, from the moment you're trained in a school till the collection, actually. So in between, there was this production place, art center called La Panacée, and it was really like a kind of biography of any artist, in some ways. It was a figurative institution. I'm joking, but the Hôtel des Collections, which was the name of this third place, was only welcoming curated exhibitions coming from private or public collections, actually. The idea that was one source, so it was also more ecological. There was just one shipping, It was an important thing also already at this time, and it's even more important now. Just one place, it's a good carbon print, I would say. also. But the idea was to have a look, or the curator having a gaze upon somebody else's gaze. Because if you're a collector, public or private, it's not the issue. There's a first selection, I would say. A collector gathers this type of works, as a thematic or a programmatics, gathering a collection. Then what was interesting for the team of curators I was working with was to find out what themes were in this collection, what could be done out of it. So it's kind of a gaze upon a gaze situation. That was really very productive. We welcome, for example, the Sandretto collection from Torino. Of course, and I forgot to say actually, the display started with Ishikawa collection. Of course, So, where with wonderful works by Pierre Huyghe and Onkawara, and so it was every situation, every exhibition was different from the next, and because there was this original first gaze, the one of the collector, from which we were elaborating an exhibition, and it was systematic because of course it happens many times that institutions do exhibitions from collections, but the idea of this place was it was systematically done.
We are at an art fair today. Collecting is a major issue. How do you analyze having worked in all those institutions, how do you analyze the main differences between public and private, especially in contemporary art today? And what thoughts do you have on the recent issues of inalienability and deaccessioning, namely the fact that collections, especially the public ones, were initially set to be immutable. You could not change the items from a collection. You could not sell or destroy an item of your collection. But some museums and some collections, even public ones today, are
especially in America.
Yes, seriously thinking about deaccessioning, which means taking part of your collection and selling it to use the money for other purposes. What are your thoughts on public-private and on
first, it's to answer directly to this last issue. It's very dangerous, because if the Louvre or any big museum could have done that at the end of 19th century, for example, they would have thrown all the El Greco paintings because it was absolutely not interesting to anyone at this time. It was absolutely invisible. Greco was not interesting. It became later on only with the help of a few art critics and art historians. Greco was rehabilitated in a way, and but we see that kind of rehabilitations all the time. Because history is moving also all the time. Our criterions are moving. We see actually all museums all over the world trying to see, what they actually missed, what is in their storage that they didn't want to see. So many women artists, for example, so many artists which are not European, etc., etc. And fortunately, sometimes they do have it in their storage, but they just now can see, show it. So it's a short-sighted idea of history, I would say. Okay, you think that this is not interesting, so you want to get rid of it. Maybe you're just doing the biggest mistake of your life as a museum curator. So who knows? So you have to see these kind of things from a very deeper historical point of view. Museum is a place where things are kept, and there's a reason for it, because it's a different time. It's not the time of what we feel now, today, in 2022. it allows time to pass, and sometimes it's very surprising because you never know what's going to happen into tomorrow's culture. For example, rehabilitating other things, that think about the criterions in 19th century in 1925, and now they are very different. So, and I forgot the beginning of the question. Sorry.
A private collector can sell to give his or her collection a better outline, a better form, a better identity. Private collection is more fluid, more mobile, whereas public collection is obviously until up to now.
That's why it's very important to distinguish one from the other, in a way. If you are a private collector, you can actually do whatever you want. It's not the question, but museum has a function, and this function is the long sustainability, in a way, of its long-term thinking, and this cannot be done most of the time by private actors.
I would like to keep a short time for some questions, but before that, I would like to ask you. You said you moved out of the institution, and so what are your thoughts on being an independent today, and what are your current and future perspectives?
Well, mainly it's more the institutions that moved me out, actually, to be honest.
An ex-form, so to say.
Exactly. It was a bit expelled, but to say it in a very simple way, there were municipal elections in France in 2020, and when I got the result, I said, prepare your luggage. So, it's the idea of some politicians think they should have an idea about what art is, which is I don't have a precise idea of what the public transport should be, and we should, stay, in our respective state of competences. But some people think they have an idea. Now, actually, I created a totally different platform of intervention. It's called Radicant, from the book I wrote, and it's what I call a curatorial cooperative or a curatorial platform. We are actually producing exhibitions, and we actually propose exhibitions like ready-made to some institutions or private foundations or whoever actually is interested in financing and producing it with us. We also organize commercial exhibitions in Paris in a space in Le Marais, but every time it's curated by someone, actually. It's very important. I want to replace curators, who are the people who have, that's the least you can ask, a vision of today's art, a knowledge, a point of view upon things. It's important for me that they are actually in the economical loop, so they are interested in every transaction or every thing we are doing, and that's very pretty important. It's not only artist and then a gallerist. There are curators in the middle, actually. So I'm not curating so much myself. I'm inviting curators to choose artists. It can be a personal, a solo show or a collective exhibition. But at the moment, I just come from Abu Dhabi, where we already produced a project called Cookbook, which I transformed the restaurant of the art fair into an artwork, and in a space, it's an exhibition format where where I invite artists and chefs, at the same in the same space, actually. So it's really about cuisine, about the relationship between art and cuisine, but in a kind of democratic space where you don't know exactly anymore very soon who's the artist and who's the chef, because the today's inventivity in cuisine is so strong, that it's obvious that we can think through our palate as much as through our eyes, and that's what we try to implement with this exhibition cookbook, which is actually today still in Abu Dhabi, but it's going to be too late to take a plane, but next time. And I still have this exhibition called Planet B I talked about earlier, which was an exhibition in 3 acts, like an opera, if you want. Which I said that already, which is about the notion of sublime in contemporary art, and the way I invited artists who actually produce spaces showing clearly this impression of being overwhelmed or endangered by the atmosphere, by the shrinking of space, also because one of I think the most important aspects of today's art is the way artists are reflecting this very simple thing, which we all feel in a confused way, but which is very accurate, which is we live in a world which is smaller and smaller. Actually, there's a feedback effect on everything. We don't have distance and space anymore, and the recent pandemics was the result of this lack of space. Actually, it's the opposite of what we know about art. For a long time, the idea of the aura, for example, because aura is a distance. We don't have distance anymore. And you can see that in contemporary art, the extinction of distance, crammed spaces, shrinking distances, etc., etc. So this kind of reflection is feeding this exhibition Planet B that is ending next week, actually.
Proxemics is also an anthropological concept. It's I think we could go on for very long, but maybe people here in the audience would like to ask you questions directly. So I would like to hand the mic to anyone who wishes to speak.
今日は興味深いお話ありがとうございました。伺いたいのは、京都なんですけども、すごく伝統とかいろんな仏教の宗派とかがあって、歴史とか伝統がすごくあるところだと思うんですね。それで、こういうところでコンテンポラリーアートを展示したり見ること、そういうことの特殊性とか面白さについて伺いたいです。あとコンテンポラリーアートと歴史との関わり、そういうところからちょっとご意見伺えればと思います。
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I would start by answering that contemporary art is art made by people who are living more or less now. There's no other definition I know. To be honest, it's not a genre. It's not a type of art for me, because there are so many different things. I've no other definition than that. It's what people are doing now. That's contemporary art. And then you have things I feel I consider very bad or not interesting, and some I consider great, and but that's something else. There's no other criterion than this one. So, what is the relationship of contemporary art towards history? It's very simple. It's exactly like the relation of today with history. There's no other explanation for me. What we see now is the result of what all the artists from everywhere since the beginning of times have done. And that should be like that, actually. Not every artist is aware of whatever else has been done till now, but more or less, yes, actually, in a way. I think most of the artists are very much aware of art of the previous centuries or even millenniums, to be honest. So then you do something interesting out of it or not. What's important is to understand the context where you are. And because, of course, that's what makes art different, actually. The context, for an artist who's working in Mexico in the 13th century is not the same than the context of a Florentine painter, in the 16th century. This produces very different types of art, as far as I know, because there is a demand. Who asks for art? That's not always been private collectors. It's even a recent thing. Actually, it starts from the 16th century, more or less, and it's very important in Holland in 17th century, which sets up the standards of collectors, artists, actually not responding to a community like it was the case in Italy in the previous century, but selling directly in a market. It was a new thing at the time. So the question is, who asks for art? What kind of institution, type of people, and how is it diffused? How is it distributed in society? Who receives it? That's different also for every society, as far as I know. And already it's two things which are already determining a little bit what is going to be produced. And then you have the artist himself or herself who actually can criticize, refuse, or want to be clandestine, for example. There are many other possibilities, and this also influences what the outcome of what art is in every period of time, in every geography. But let's not think of contemporary art as something specific, because it's not true. It's just our answer, today's problematics and today's structures.
Thank you for your wonderful talk. This could be a little silly question, but just to spin off your thought on climate change and also museum, what was your take on this recent radical movement such as Just Stop Oil?
You mean the intrusion of the splashing, tomato sauce?
Mm-hmm.
No. Well, I'm not sure, it's the best place to attack, to be honest. I think there's something a bit wrong here, actually. I would prefer, the militants to throw tomato puree to the president of Total, or for example. I think that would make more sense, no? This poor Klimt or this poor money, they have nothing to do with that. The message that they actually sent is art more important than the survival of the planet? That's the message they're actually trying to convey. I think the question is poorly articulated here. Because, yes, I think one of the reasons, as I said at the very beginning of this talk, one of the reasons we have to fight against climate change is to preserve this, not to attack it.
Thank you.
I think we are running out of time, but maybe would you like to conclude? If you do have a conclusion, otherwise we can just...
You really think I can conclude that?
Maybe so. As a farewell, your thoughts on holding a contemporary art fair in Kyoto, the question that was asked before, maybe we can finish with that.
Well, actually, I was interested by the structure of the art fair and the idea of collaborating also. That are the two things which I think are very interesting here. That's a good way, actually, to invite. I think that makes sense to me. And then, as I said a bit earlier, I really like the display because it's very different from the traditional white cube that we see, and most of the art fairs I know are just a collection of white cubes, put together, and that's good to be questioned, sometimes. So yeah, in terms of a project, I think it's really relevant.
Okay, so we will end our talk here. Thank you, Nicolas, and thank you for your attention.
For persons.